Today, we welcome Doug Thompson to this episode of the Future Humans 3.0 vodcast show. Doug is the CEO and Chief Ideas Officer of the Bureau of Bright Ideas, which is a strategic agency for the Metaverse. Doug is also the publisher of Out of Scope newsletter, of which he has written several intriguing thought pieces on the open metaverse, amongst a myriad of other futuristic topics. As a serial entrepreneur, he has launched or helped to launch dozens of products or platforms for companies such as Sony Entertainment. He's been quoted in several major business publications such as Forbes, Business Insider, Apple Insider, amongst others. And this is just a brief insight into his long list of accomplishments. Doug, how are you? Thank you for being on board the Holoship today.
Let's fly.
Yeah, and so first of all, I'm super impressed by all your writing and thought pieces. I've been reading them avidly, like a map of the metaverse, and of course everything that you've been involved with in the tech industry. So I guess the best way to kick this all off is how did you get into all of this? How did you get into the Telegram chat of Crucible? And yeah, your thoughts on the metaverse, I guess.
Yeah, so I've been actually probably thinking and writing about the metaverse for about 15 years. I was the producer of a talk show called Metanomics, not dissimilar to this, where all of the participants had avatars similar to yours.
Wow.
And we had people like Noam Chomsky, the head of the World Bank. We had anthropologists like Tom Bolstorff, economists. Tyler Cohen was on the show, like really geeky people from all kinds of disciplines. Amazing. Because I was always fascinated with how, we engage with technology, but in particular, how we engage in technology where we can have a sense of presence, meaning that I could feel like I'm in a virtual space with somebody. So my fascination has been about avatars, culture, how virtual spaces embody new opportunities for play, creation, and even enterprise. So I've been kind of kicking around this thing for 15 years, and it's kind of wild that even just in the past 6 months, it seems like the word metaverse is on everybody's lips. Often not used the right way, but whatever, that's us all trying to figure out what it means.
It's very interesting. I agree with you because obviously your show Metanomics, when was that? What year was that?
I think that was like I'm going to say 2008. Like I was just checking recently, I was writing a post and I think we had Noam Chomsky on in 2008. Amazing. So that goes back 13, 14 years.
So like that just proves that virtual worlds have been around for so long. And so it's been really interesting that like the word metaverse like just seems to be popping up in the vernacular and zeitgeist this year, and people from my understanding can misconstrue that it just means virtual worlds, but of course it means so much more. Like it's I'd love to hear your thoughts about, is it thought about as the third act of the internet, where it's the internet of everything, physical, digital?
It's probably all of that. I try not to be too stuck on the definition myself personally, because I think that we're trying to come to a consensus as a community of what are the boundaries for the metaverse. How will I even know that I've logged into the metaverse?
Exactly.
But I'll share a couple of kind of thoughts. One is that the metaverse in particular is happening right now because we have started to see the power of computers to think spatially. And previously that was difficult or more difficult. Even if you think of games that you've played, you used to put them on a CD or a DVD, had a lot of content. You couldn't really play it online because there was too much, it was too difficult to do. But think about what you could do with your phone. I could take my phone and I could take a number of pictures of an object from a number of different angles, and I could create a 3D object from that scan. And that's called photogrammetry, which is pretty amazing. Some phones now have LiDAR in them, which is a type of radar that allows you to do spatial mapping.
Yes.
And then in online environments, the tools for 3D creation have become more and more accessible. Things like Blender have advanced a lot. Unity, even Unreal is basically free.
Yes.
So the tools, the bandwidth, and in particular chips on our computers that allow for graphics processing and chips on our phones mean that computers have become spatially aware. So the metaverse is sort of there.
Yes.
I'm going to say, like, computers have this ability to create models of space. Now the question is how to make all of that visible in a way that we can also jump around relatively easily. On my phone, if I want to have 3 different experiences, I have to click on 3 different app icons.
Yes.
On the web, I could just move from site to site. I click a link, I'm moving from one server to another. And that to me is what the metaverse will be, is this ability to move from one space to another with very little friction.
Yes.
Friction is where all of the innovation is going to happen, is that there's these huge friction points. And so people are tackling those friction points in super creative and interesting ways. And because of that creativity and because of that innovation, it means that I'm not sure that there's a consensus on what it's actually going to look like. Yes. And we could talk more about that, but that's why I think it's exciting that it's not quite defined yet.
Yes.
Is it going to look like a web browser? Is it going to look like Steam?
Yes.
It's not quite defined yet, but that's exciting because it means that there's a huge field of innovation that's possible.
That's so true. And I love what you say about the friction points are where the opportunities, it's like where there's challenges, there are opportunities. And when I think about even the pandemic as a creative and that, has expedited all of this, I think I was on this trajectory anyway, because I had this avatar character for my music since 2018, but it definitely expedited my mission to experiment with, for example, like right now, motion capture technology, even though it's been around forever, but, becoming, more user and democratized. Like I've seen with the music production world, it used to be like engineers in studios, and then it became like the kid in the bedroom and the bedroom producer. So that's always the path of technology becoming more democratized. So that's really interesting. I love that. And so how did you find yourself in the Crucible space? Because that's how we connected.
Well, first of all, just because I think that's an amazing community, it has some incredible people in it, and there's a bunch of little pockets like that. I think many pockets like that in the world of the metaverse, and I just find the people really amazing. I like what Crucible is doing, because what they're trying to do is handle some of those friction points. So one of the projects I know that they're working on is how do I keep track of my friends as I move through all kinds of different virtual environments. Right now, you can kind of have your gamer tag on PlayStation, but you have a separate identity when you're in that world. So they're trying to solve this. They're trying to solve this friction point of how do I present myself across a whole bunch of different platforms. So I like what Crucible is doing. I like their mission, but it's also just a cool group of people. And isn't that the amazing thing about this area?
Yes.
Is the people. I mean, the energy of the people sharing links, sharing an idea, gets these incredible conversations going, whether it's in Discord, Telegram, Twitter. And I don't know, I just find you can have healthy, productive, positive dialogues. And it's just it's just an amazing industry to be in.
Yeah, there's a lot of creative energy and it's inspiring a lot of people. It's like this feeling of a renaissance, and it kind of makes me think. I was really young around the time, but the early stages of the internet, and then you had David Bowie in an interview, I'm not sure if you've seen it, and he's describing it like as this alien life form, but it was so prophetic. And obviously he's a musician, but it's just so, as you said, healthy dialogue, what everyone thinks it will be versus what it ends up being, but it's very interesting.
Yeah, that's one of the great all-time interviews about technology, I would have to say.
Yes. And so I'd love to now talk about your writing. So I love this article that you wrote about a map of the metaverse, and it was like this experiment thought piece, and it got me thinking a lot. And so I'd just love to funnel in on that and let you explain in your own words, how you came up with this, figurative map to the metaverse, and what you were thinking at the time.
I have no idea where these, I don't know where these ideas come from, but I'll tell you the result. I guess there's two things. First of all, I'm a big fan of open world games. I just love them.
Yes.
Like, not something, maybe Grand Theft Auto, Skyrim, Witcher, just these games where as you move through the world, you can have subtle shifts in terrain. I mean, I love Red Dead Redemption because as you can move through swamp lands, and then suddenly you're up in kind of the mountains, and I just love that feeling of moving through space.
Yes.
So that's part of my passion, and I've actually spent a fair bit of time exploring how game maps work. So I just have a passion for the topic. But the real genesis of the piece was that I'm concerned and motivated by the topic of discovery. And the reason I'm motivated by that is discovery, I think, is one of those risky things that could end up being a silo, just like we all rely on Google to find search results, or we rely on social media to keep in touch with our friends, and those are centralized silos. So my question becomes, how are people going to discover places in the metaverse? And kind of the conventional wisdom has been, it's not going to be any different than a URL because that technology already exists. A URL is a request to a server to send me a bunch of data. So it makes a lot of sense. I want to go and visit a world. So I need to request the data of that world get loaded to my computer so that I can interact with it. But if we follow that logic of it just being links, then it has the possibility as well as of being siloed. That there's that our traffic can start to be monetized. So one of the solutions that a lot of virtual worlds use is portals. And it's the ability to be, let's say, in a virtual space, and I can have a little doorway, and I walk through that doorway, and suddenly I'm in a different world. And those types of traffic shaping mechanisms, you could see it actually in Fortnite Creative. When you log into Fortnite Creative, there's a bunch of featured portals, and you click on the portal and you go into somebody's world. The rest of them are handled by links, and you kind of need to know that the link is there in order to find that world. So you could see the issue of discoverability. So my thought experiment was, how could we create a kind of foundational map that would allow people a third way to travel through the metaverse and to experience it as a space, to experience it as a universe, so that there's a possibility for serendipity. What you're talking about when the internet was first launched, that was the thing about the internet, was there was that feeling of serendipity. You'd be on one page, and then you'd be on another, and then you'd be on another. You didn't find web pages because you saw them on Instagram. You saw them just because you were kind of wandering around, and that serendipity was really quite amazing. So the idea was to think about, what that could look like, how it could be open source, how it could be community driven. And in fact, tomorrow we're doing sort of a little mini hackathon at the Open Metaverse Initiative to try to advance the concept. So that a bunch of people picked up on it, and it looks like we're going to try to make it a reality. So the Open Metaverse Initiative is really fun. First of all, it's just super fun. It's a group of people who come together to do little prototypes. And the purpose of the prototypes is to prove and to catalyze other companies to look at ways to be interoperable. So if you're developing a virtual world with avatars and you go, well, I know I should be interoperable. Like, I know my avatar should be able to travel around, but I have no idea how to do it. OMI is trying to create examples of how this interoperability would work. So part of the motivation of the group, and I'm not leading it at all by any stretch, part of the motivation of the group is to take my map post and to start to just create a map of like sort of who are the players in the metaverse, so that we all have a bit of a shared understanding of how big this industry has become. So that was the genesis of the piece, and that's a little bit of the logic behind it.
With Web 2, right, we have like this problem of echo chambers and narrow AI for discovery, and, we can't really then learn about new things, new projects so much because the algorithm is always recommending based on our preferences. So Something that excites me about Web3 is the concept of, discovery, and not being in that echo chamber. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, look, there's promise and peril with every technology, and there will be bad actors. But I think one of the things that we need to start to come to terms with and to figure out what it means is that the metaverse in many ways slows things down. In the sense that I could scroll TikTok for a couple minutes and get a bunch of little like nuggets and tiny little dopamine hits. But what the metaverse is proposing is that we're going to be present with smaller groups of people. We're going to feel kind of closer to them. And what does that mean to start to slow things down? So that actually gives me some hope for what the metaverse could become. It'll be everything from, I mean, one of the most amazing, this will sound strange, but I think one of the most amazing experiences is watching a movie with somebody who's in a completely different country, and you're sitting together in a room together watching a movie.
Yeah.
And so it's allowing us to connect with people that might be at a distance, but have a true sense of presence with them. Because you may have spatial audio, so you hear their voice as if they're sitting to your right. And then your brain is tricked, and your brain doesn't need a lot of fidelity. It doesn't need a lot of graphics to be tricked that it's seeing other people. And there have been studies, and in fact, I've done a lot of work in this field where we used avatars, for example, for PTSD training for military amputees.
Yeah. And
we were able to show that their use of an avatar could sort of, I'm not going to say trick their brain, but it could improve their relationship to their body, because the brain doesn't necessarily differentiate between body and avatar, which is super fascinating and weird.
Wow.
So that also opens up, by the way, I think some interesting possibilities around diversity representation, all kinds of different ways of expressing ourselves, whether we want to be a space captain, a dog, a frog, so it's going to be all kinds of interesting ways for self-expression.
Yeah.
So I still think discoverability is going to be one of the big unanswered questions. I think it is today. How to make sure that discoverability doesn't become just an extension of social media or an extension of algorithmic search. I'm not sure that I have an answer for it, but the map concept was one way to start thinking about encouraging people to start to think about serendipity.
It gets me thinking about technologies such as artificial intelligence, because that's narrow AI with the algorithms. But as AI gets more developed and sentient over time, obviously this will be part of the metaverse, and proof of humanity versus are you engaging with an AI avatar is things that I think about a lot. And then how does that, ethical implications from that, and trust. And then obviously us as humans, right? Something I also think about is, we see like companies like Neuralink and the benefits of the technology, like for brain to computer interfaces, say if you're disabled, or like, for health reasons. And some people I've spoken to would say, of course, I'd love to speak 10 different languages. Like, of course, if I could upload my mind. I'm, just very inspired by these, thought experiments, I guess, for how this all feeds into the great game, or, the open metaverse, like AIs, humans, or transhumanism. So if you've got any thoughts, I'd love to hear them. Yeah.
So there's a couple things to unpack there. I think the first is on AI, and I think it's one of the misconceptions about the metaverse is that I think people feel that the metaverse will mostly be built, that people will build it. I'm actually of a different opinion. I actually think that much of the metaverse will be built, generated by computers. AI will be sort of building it. Architecture will be responsive. I'm working, I've been I don't know if you know Pico Velasquez, but she's got some super interesting thinking around how architecture can also be embedded with machine learning and AI, and it can be change over time and it can decay over time. So that's one. So, and my second is a kind of a bigger, I don't know, fuzzy theory. I'm not quite sure. It's just this vague notion. And it's the notion that the metaverse actually represents, what the metaverse actually represents is an agreement between people and machines, strange as that sounds, that this is the place that we're going to meet.
Yeah.
Because it's going to be the most intuitive to each side. Mm-hmm. So I kind of have this theory that without our intending it to happen, that the metaverse will pass the Turing test for an ecology before we pass the Turing test for the human brain. That, in other words, computers' natural evolution isn't towards mimicking the human brain, it's towards mimicking the world.
Wow.
And so the metaverse is sort of this agreement that we've come to with computers to create a 3D space in which we can interact with each other. Mm-hmm. So we think of it as, oh, it's like a game. I think of it on the long-term horizon because we're not far out from computers being incredibly smart.
The singularity.
And AI being incredibly scary.
Yeah.
But that the metaverse is the place where we're going to be meeting with the sentient machine.
That's very interesting, and I can see what you're saying. And how would this relate to blockchain, if that makes sense? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of layers to blockchain, but one of the things I think that's super interesting about it is what you talked about with trust. So although blockchain is pseudo-anonymous, it is all about building the capacity to have trusted relationships in a transactional way, right?
Yeah.
So and I'm not saying blockchain will underpin all of the metaverse. And in fact, I think that's another interesting tension is between the kind of Web3 dApps, blockchain, NFTs, DAOs, and then another group, which I'll say includes maybe Facebook and Epic and these guys, who they're going to build a metaverse. It's going to have a lot of the same features. If lessons start to get passed back and forth, I think that's one of the lessons, is that there's something in how blockchain is handled, proof, that may be a really valuable lesson for how we're going to build trust in the metaverse, including the ability to know whether the person I'm talking to is real or not.
Yeah. Just to jump in there, a fun thought I entertained was, proof of humanity. I saw it on, and if like humans, let's say, have the ability in the future, this is borderline science fiction, but it's, we're seeing it with like Neuralink, to upload their minds or upgrade their minds. And so, they're like working with machine. How does one then define proof of humanity?
Yes, very interesting question. I wrote a post called Semi-Autonomous Avatars.
Yeah.
And it was this idea that I could log into a virtual world or a game or whatever, log into the metaverse with my avatar. I could go to a dance. We could go clubbing at a Dead concert or whatever. And then I log out. But that doesn't mean that my avatar needs to be logged out. Right. So I could actually see a time when I leave my avatar behind. And it's interacting, it's collecting data, it's maybe putting a discoverability list together, it's maybe having transactions, and it's all doing that while I am asleep. So my avatar starts to become a true extension of me.
Right.
Is that the same as the singularity? Not really, but it's definitely going to be an interesting way of extending our humanity for sure.
Amazing. Well, I mean, obviously we're like scrolling far into the future, but if we're looking at 2021 and our immediate presence, we're seeing in the zeitgeist people talking about NFTs a lot, and we're seeing the launch of a lot of projects, and it's a lot of creative energy, and it's very exciting. It got me thinking, with avatars and identity in the open metaverse, they have like their own clubs, like Bored Ape Yacht Club, and then, you might have a Star Wars siloed universe, metaverse. And so with this concept of the open metaverse, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. How do identities like the player agent work with that? Where, is it culturally inappropriate to rock up as a Bored Ape in a Star Wars themed, world?
Yeah, so that was part of my thesis. I wrote a post called, I don't remember what it was called, but it was about avatar permissions.
Yes.
And it was this idea that in order to remove it, there's all these friction points we were talking about. And one of those friction points, I think, let's say that we can accomplish interoperability.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say that it's super easy for me to jump from Roblox to Fortnite.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you've eliminated all of the friction. It just means that, okay, my avatar has moved from one space to another.
Mm-hmm.
So the first friction point, if it's anything like the web, as soon as you get into transactions or certain types of content, I'm going to need to sign an end user license agreement. There's a privacy policy.
Right.
There's all this stuff that I have to agree to. So I had this concept that your avatar should carry around default permissions so that when I arrive in a virtual space, my avatar can have a quick negotiation with that space to say, okay, what are your policies? These are my policies. And here's the exception so that you're removing that friction.
Right.
The other side of that, aside from the kind of permissions and contract stuff, the other side of that is that the world builder may have some rules about conduct, dress. They may have a theme world, as you say, it might be a Star Wars theme world, and they insist that you wear a Star Wars costume. So you may be entering certain virtual spaces where you have to go into a change room and change into a new costume in order to enter. The reality is, I think much of the metaverse will be pretty messy.
Yeah.
Like, look at Fortnite. I mean, you've got people running around as Batman, Ariana Grande.
Marvel.
It's just I think Tim Sweeney's doing that on purpose.
Yes.
I think he's trying to get us used to this idea that virtual worlds and game environments and the metaverse doesn't need to have a single theme, that you can kind of mix up IP and that we become used to that. So I think he's doing that quite intentionally.
He's very clever. And when you talk about IP, it gets me thinking a lot about, legacy Hollywood. And, we have the IPs that we love, but it's very disruptive, and the creative energy that's happening at the moment. And I'm thinking of certain projects like Jenkins the Valet, and, it involves a community for storytelling, or it's generative. So I'd love to pivot to that and your thoughts on, community involvement with building IP and how that relates to all of this.
Yeah, I mean, hasn't it turned on its head?
Yeah.
I think it's turned on its head because instead of Disney launching a new Avengers and then you get excited about the characters, so you buy the comic book or you buy the action figure or you buy the skin in Fortnite, we're starting with a little picture of a character. Just a JPEG, and people are paying crazy amounts of money for it.
Yeah.
So the Bored Apes is probably one of the best known, because people were just bidding on a very vague concept of what this world would look like and agreeing that they wanted to be a fan. Think of it, you're being a fan. I'm agreeing to be a fan before the IP has even been created. One of the analogies I use is it's like saying, look, buy one of these NFTs and you get to sit in the script room with the writers before the movie is even made. So there's something pretty powerful about that. It creates new configurations of relationships between authors and their communities. It allows communities to become authors themselves.
Yes.
Much the way that people write fan fiction or do fan art. So it's an incredibly powerful moment. And the reason I think it's so powerful is that NFTs solve some of the licensing issues, which have traditionally been a huge roadblock to this type of energy having any momentum.
Yep.
Because as soon as a lawyer notices it, there you go, the brakes are on.
Yeah.
But what NFTs and DAOs are doing is that they're saying, look, we're going to be everything's going to be transparent. It's going to be on the blockchain.
Mm.
We're going to be clear about how the licensing works.
Yeah.
So that it takes the kind of legal aspect away in order to allow communities to build their own franchises.
It's a very fun and interesting space to be in. And then you see the gaming industry and the recent announcement with Steam and not accepting, NFT crypto based games, on their platform. But then you've got Epic and they're saying, we're open to NFT games if it meets these conditions.
Yes.
And we're seeing this rift happen. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on the gaming industry now.
Yeah. I think you're going to end up with, so when you look at Epic, there's several sides to that. There's Epic as a game producer, such as Fortnite, and Tim does not believe in NFTs right now, and he doesn't particularly believe in blockchain, primarily for technical reasons. Primarily for technical reasons. However, they're also a game engine. And as a game engine, they're saying, look, we're not going to restrict the creativity of people creating games. And by implication, it means that they will accept games in its game store that do have NFTs in them. Steam, on the other hand, I think I don't know their motivations. I'm kind of assuming that there's a money motivation, but there are also a lot of legal issues kind of floating around the space right now related to regulation, the SEC. One of the big questions right now is, are NFTs a tradable security? Or are they just a collectible? And it's possible that Steam, they may just have a super conservative lawyer who's saying, no, you better be careful. If you allow NFTs, you're basically a financial trading platform. And that opens us up to all kinds of other scrutiny. So there's a lot of factors at play with that particular issue. But I think in general, the industry will get pulled towards opening up to Web3, even if that doesn't necessarily mean that they're all in. And that's I think that's one of the most interesting tension points of the next 5 years.
Another thing that I've been really interested in learning more about is this concept of play to earn or learn to earn. We've got Axie Infinity, and so what's your thoughts on play to earn as well as loot gaming as well?
One of the things I have to say about play to earn is we've actually been doing this for decades, so this isn't new. And yet people are talking about it as if it's this big new invention that's super innovative. And the reason I say that isn't to sound like, oh, back in the day we were doing this, but it's to say that some of the issues around play to earn there's been some deep thinking about it. There's been some catastrophic errors, and there's been a wealth of academic research on the topic. Okay. So all I'm saying is that there's lessons that we need to take from the past and make sure that we're still looking at them in the present. When I look at something like Star Atlas, I don't know if you know Star Atlas, probably a fantastic example of a really, really well thought out game economy. Like really well thought out. This is a game economy that's been built by people who clearly have looked at history and have economists probably on their team in addition to tokenomics people, because they really seem to have thought about how play to earn has an impact on the gameplay itself. Because one of the things about Axie Infinity is, yeah, sure, it's play to earn, but it's not a particularly good game. It's just not. I mean, it's not a good game. Star Atlas's vision is actually to have a good game. But to have a good game, you have to be balancing. It's all about balancing. And in the past, when franchises have opened themselves up to play to earn, like Diablo is an example, it could radically distort the gameplay. So doing this stuff very carefully, like it's fun right now. It's great. There's people making money in the quote unquote in the metaverse, but that doesn't mean that it's any fun. As soon as it shifts into being fun, that's where you have to be really, really good at developing these systems. So it's a super exciting opportunity. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm just throwing up a kind of a note of caution that people could build these play to earn economies, which could very, very quickly collapse if they're not careful, if they're not built carefully. I think the more interesting shift in the future won't be in the play community, will be starting to think about what other types of enterprise will shift to the metaverse.
Right.
Because there's a lot of things, when you start to think about things like mirror worlds, BMW has created a mirror of their factory in the metaverse, in the Omniverse.
Right.
So that people in Singapore can log into this mirror of their factory and do real-time repairs and adjustments and check out what's happening in the factory. So I think there's going to be other ways to earn money in the metaverse that don't even relate necessarily to gameplay.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I saw this amazing article the other day about speculative new job titles, and it's just fun to read and entertain the idea, because I guess the answer is no one really knows until it's been actively built at the moment. It has been for a long time, but it's just sometimes it's fun to speculate, but I think you have to be, as you said, it's fun, but you got to be cautious and well thought out to build the infrastructure correctly, so it's beneficial to everyone and it doesn't collapse.
But what it's saying, and this was the big revelation 20 years ago, was people looked at it was play to earn. It was early examples like, I'm going to say Ultima Online. Certainly World of Warcraft was the big one.
Yeah.
World of Warcraft, you ended up with factories in Japan, and all they were doing was mining gold in Warcraft. So it was just hundreds of people sitting at terminals gathering gold. So we've seen this storyline before, but I think something like Axie Infinity is just kind of it's today's example that's saying, oh, hold on here. We've got to pay attention, because suddenly people are making, billions of dollars of economic value is being generated. What? And that looked like a game to me. So it's waking people up to the fact that we're in the middle of a massive reallocation of capital.
Yes.
The CEO of NVIDIA has claimed that he thinks that the economic value in the metaverse will be larger than the world's current GDP.
Yeah, no. Yeah. And when you talked about redistribution of capital, I guess was it the Philippines where it's very popular, Axie Infinity? And so I think when people see things have social good and all of that, it makes people excited about it as well. And I saw you wrote in your article, I think was that the metaverse is beautiful and light. Was that what the article? Yeah. And people's impressions, and different concerns or impressions that you've come across. I'll let you speak on it. One that came from my memory, you can correct me if I'm wrong, was like people potentially being concerned that they're in this AR walking down the street, I think you said, like with this AR reality, so are they disengaged from the real world? I'd love to hear your thoughts and views on this.
Yeah, so here's the problem, I think, with people like me. And the problem is that the stuff that I learned 15 years ago, I actually think I know what I'm talking about, right? And the reason I say that is I could talk about play to earn, for example, because I sort of saw this story before.
Yeah.
But then the reality, so that blinds me a little bit to the reality of today. And so I have to be super careful that the things that I think that I know aren't necessarily true anymore. So I was at an event and they were talking about the metaverse, and it was all very sort of skeptical and
skeptical.
And it's particularly from people who may have felt frustrated that the metaverse didn't happen sooner, and they're just scared. I choose to look at it that what we need to do is we need to encourage the positive energy that's out there right now. and to not um, assume that people are oblivious to these concerns.
Yes.
Because I don't think there's anybody I talk to, certainly in Web3, who isn't concerned about data silos and accidentally creating the next Facebook.
Yeah.
So my argument in that post was, yes, look, we should learn from history. Facebook was an example. This idea that, I very, very soon, within the next 5 years, I'm going to be able to wear glasses that will be able to put anything in the world around me and make it look real.
Yeah.
So somebody says, oh, well, that sounds really scary because suddenly I'm going to walk down the street and it's going to be replaced by the Star Wars universe. Well, okay, maybe that's true, but I don't know anybody who's planning to do that. Even the big tech companies like Apple, and I don't even think Facebook would do that. I just don't. I think we have to have faith that if we encourage the community to stick to their values and continue to innovate, that something beautiful is going to come out of it.
Yes, that's beautiful. And I guess that ties in with what I believe it's a word that's thrown around a lot, but it helps me explain my thoughts, protopian, because obviously utopians never, that would be a dystopia, utopia. So protopia, makes sense to me. And so, and as you said, like when we're talking to different people in this Web3 community, it's like, as you said, there's this general consensus and understanding that we don't want to repeat the mistakes, of the past, and like that, of course, self-sovereign identity and privacy, it's going to be a given. So yeah, I love what you said.
Yeah, I think, now I could play the other side of the coin. And the other side of the coin is that we also need to proceed carefully. Because what will often happen is that we'll leave it to the coders. God bless them, and I love them, and I'm a programmer also. But programmers make decisions based on efficiency, often for efficiency, not always, but that can be one of the criteria. And if you look at the internet itself, when the internet was designed, anonymity was built in.
Yeah.
There was no ability to do transactions were never considered in the design of the internet, which made sense at the time. So all I'm saying is that decisions can get baked into the code before we, as a community, have had these broader discussions. That's why I love things like the Open Metaverse Initiative, Crucible, because it's bringing minds together from different disciplines to try to move forward carefully and make sure that stuff doesn't get baked in too soon until we've really thought through the implications. I'm also involved with XSRI, which is the XR Safety Initiative.
Cool.
And they're doing a lot of work with governments, for example, to talk about what does a responsible metaverse actually look like. Because it opens up it opens up some terrifying possibilities as well. But I have some faith in the community. I have some faith that we all know what hasn't worked in the past. And then if we proceed a bit cautiously and with lots of dialogue, that we can accomplish something amazing.
Exactly. Healthy debate and think tanks to explore all sides of the spectrum.
Yeah, like this show.
Yeah, exactly. And this, I'm getting to the end of this interview, but something I also want to talk about that we talked about earlier was the concept of, as a human, you can like opt out and your avatar's still there collecting, data or whatever, participating. That's all well and good. Like something I think about as well is I personally love the concept of technology being able to empower humans, which can then evolve to the whole transhumanism side of the spectrum. The other thing that I also, on the other side of the spectrum, think about is obviously the ability to switch off, log off, if that makes sense, to not always be present in this metaverse, if that makes sense.
I think that, it sort of equates a little bit to the right to be forgotten, but it's the right to be invisible. And I think a lot of these issues will actually play out in AR way more than they'll play out in VR.
Right.
And let's call it that virtual metaverse. because the two are the same, by the way. A computer doesn't know the difference between place a Pokemon character next to a tree in an actual park versus place a Pokemon character in a virtual environment. So when I talk about the metaverse, it includes all of these spatial technologies. And I think it'll play out in AR because it will become evident pretty quickly that AR creates some super interesting ethical dilemmas. Some of them are just IP related. Like, do I have the right, for example, to overlay the Empire State Building with a giant Coke ad? Like, who owns the right to use the surfaces of the Empire State Building?
Right.
I've seen AI now can remove stuff from a photo with machine learning. I can remove anything. I can remove people. You would never know that they were there in that photo.
Yeah.
That same technology will come to our glasses. So in theory, this could be really, like, I'll just say the scary ideas. But in theory, I could say, I want to walk down the street and I would like my glasses to remove every person over the age of 40. Or replace them with Paris Hilton. I don't know, whatever. So it's gonna create some real ethical dilemmas as well. And when you talk about the right to be turned off, that includes if I'm wearing glasses, they're a surveillance device. I'm wearing a surveillance device.
You can remove the glasses, but if it was like integrated in your physical body, I guess.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is governments are going to say, hold on, we all need the right to be invisible to the technology. And so I think there's going to be this pressure to be able to turn ourselves off, to turn technology completely off.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I'm just kind of riffing here a little bit.
Yeah.
But, and there's also, I mean, that's another interesting point is equality, because are you going to be disadvantaged? What happens to people that don't have glasses? Right? It's like not having a phone these days. So what happens to the people if you go out to a restaurant and everybody's wearing glasses except for you?
Right.
So they're able to participate in a whole other reality at that restaurant that it isn't even visible to you. Does that create a disadvantage? Or is that person the smart person? I don't know.
Oh, it's all good thinking here, Doug.
Lots of questions, lots of issues.
Lots of questions, and it's okay to have lots of questions. I think it's the point of this discussion and talk as well. We don't always have the answers, so it's good to think of the questions and the right questions. I guess my last thought is, what advice do you have for people right now in the present, if they're looking at all these technologies, and if they want to adapt their business or
there's an interview I did with Spatial Reality. You could check that out about the enterprise side. And my thing is for enterprise, it's have a strategy. Don't just grab onto this stuff because you keep seeing the word metaverse everywhere. Like, don't yell at your agency, give me metaverse, I need some metaverse. But to actually think about it strategically. But I think at an individual level, one of the things that's super exciting about this is that there are so many communities that you can join. And that you have to come at this with the attitude of, if I'm open and collaborative, amazing things will happen and amazing opportunities will happen. It's a very different mindset, I think, even than pre-pandemic.
Yes.
Because I think what the pandemic helped to unleash was it showed us that we don't all need to go to an office where all of our ideas are encapsulated between four walls. That you suddenly realize how ideas can flow across boundaries and time zones. And I think that's opened people up to this idea that, like, I'm not looking for a job. I'm just looking for cool people to work with.
Totally. Or connect.
The money part will always take care of itself, in my opinion. I know it sounds weird, but That's my opinion,
I
especially at this time with this community.
I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, you're in Costa Rica. I'm in Australia, and here we are connecting on on these ideas. It's truly incredible. It's very exciting, and I as a creative, I've seen a paradigm shift with all these communities, and of course NFTs. Of course, being a music creative and a visual creative, it's been very exciting to see all these communities emerge and pop up, and there's definitely this collaborative spirit emerging, and a lot of creative, renaissance, if you have it, energy. So yeah, it's an exciting time. And thank you so much, Doug, for joining me today on the Holo Show.
It's been amazing to be here.